Good day. Welcome to today's Huntington Learning Center webinar, Navigating the Digital SAT. These are going to be essential insights for both parents and students on this incredible change in our college board admissions exam, the SAT. Now, a few things about Huntington Learning Center. For those of you who may know, we actually started around 1977, so we've been around for over 40 years. And we've achieved the longest track record helping students from kindergarten through grades 12 achieve academic success and to help boost their confidence. So there's some really great things about Huntington that I think differentiate Huntington from other programs, or maybe just even going out and hiring a tutor. And the first thing is that everything that we do is taught by a highly trained tutor, and they're all certified. And that's really critical for us to make sure that everyone who interacts with your child has that training and that expertise to be able to deliver the right education that your student needs. Huntington is also accredited, and we're accredited by the Middle States Association of Colleges and Schools. And the reason why that's an important accreditation to us is that as your child goes through their academic life and seeks degrees and certificates and other things, typically most organizations that will be degree certifying or provide certificates are accredited by Middle States Association of Colleges and Schools. The other thing is that we use a really targeted approach, and this is probably my favorite aspect of Huntington, because everything that we do is personalized, individualized, and really that's so critical, because whether your child has an issue in math or study skills or test taking, whatever it is, sometimes there are common problems that kids have. But at the end of the day, your student learns a little bit differently, has different strengths, different weaknesses. So we want to make sure that we get students in, we do that assessment, we figure out what are those strengths and weaknesses so that we can develop that personalized program. And the results really do speak for themselves, particularly when it comes to the SAT or the ACT. We see on average an increase of 229 points on the SAT and 5.4 points on the ACT. So that's really significant. And of course, doing well on the SAT not only improves your chances in college admissions, but it also really opens up the door for scholarships. And I think on average, we're about $71,000 per student in scholarships. And so that is really, really significant when you figure in the cost of college. It's not getting any cheaper. So that's definitely an added benefit. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Carol Lavallo. And so Carol is the Director of Education Development and Huntington Learning Center's test prep expert. She's actually been with the company for over 17 years, and during her tenure, she has helped thousands of students build the skills, confidence, and motivation that they need to increase their SAT or ACT scores, and really make sure that they're getting the acceptances and the college admissions that they're shooting for, as well as just overall improving their academic standing and knowledge and skill base. And so I can't think of a better person to bring in to talk about the changes to the digital SAT than Carol. So Carol, I'm going to turn things over to you. Take it away.
Thank you so much for such a great introduction. I'd like to thank everybody on the call as well for taking time out of busy schedules today to join me as we talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that's the digital SAT. So for today, we're going to start by reviewing the timeline for the digital SAT rollout. From there, we'll spend some time talking about what's changing, and we'll look at a breakdown of each section of the new test. Then we'll talk a bit about the current college admissions landscape and what parents need to know about college admissions. You're going to want to know how all of these changes impact your students, so we're going to be sure to discuss that. And I'll share some information about how Huntington can help with our services. Then we'll round out the hour answering some questions that you might have. So let's get started, shall we? So the first question I'm sure you all have is, when does this all happen? What's the timeline for the digital transition? So we'll start there. Here's an overview of the rollout of the digital SAT suite this year and next. In October 2023, the digital PSAT 8-9 will be available for 8th and 9th grade students everywhere. And the digital PSAT National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test will be available to 11th grade students everywhere. In March 2024, the digital PSAT 10 will be offered to 10th grade students everywhere. and the same for the digital SAT for all eligible students. So the digital SAT will be offered for the first time in March of 2024. This means that December of 2023, this December, is the last opportunity to take the paper-based SAT. After that, there will be no more paper and pencil SAT at all. So US students in the class of 2025 will be the first to take the digital SAT as juniors. So for the parents on the call today, now is actually a great time to consider enrolling your students in a test prep program so they can take the SAT as a paper-based exam before things change. Please just keep that in mind. We're going to talk more about that later today. So the next big question is, what's changing with this move to a digital SAT? We'll address everything that the College Board has shared so far on what your student can expect. So the biggest change to the digital SAT is that it will use a multi-stage adaptive format. Let's break down what multi-stage adaptive actually means. First, there are a few different formats of testing, so I'd like to talk through the differences with you, and we'll start with linear testing. So linear testing is a test format that's fixed. This type of exam has a set of questions that are the same for all test takers, and those questions don't change. This is what most parents are used to their students taking in school, and this is what the current paper and pencil SAT is. It's a linear test. So questions on a linear test do not change. So it stands to reason then that questions in adaptive testing do change. There are a few types of adaptive testing. The first is computer adaptive testing, or CAT testing. This is a test delivery platform that adjusts the difficulty of each question given to the student during the test based on the student's performance on the previous question. So essentially, on this type of test, if a student answers a question correctly, the next question they see will be a harder question. If they answer a question incorrectly, the next question they see on the test will be an easier question. So the test adjusts question difficulty based on the student's performance on the previous question. Another type of adaptive testing is multi-stage adaptive testing, or MST. The new digital SAT will be multi-stage adaptive. This means that the test is divided into sets of questions, and the test adjusts a set of questions based on the test taker's performance on a preceding set of questions. So it adapts not question by question, but rather in stages. The student completes one stage or set of questions, and then the test chooses the next stage or set of questions based on the student's performance on the previous stage. So the digital SAT has two sections, the math section and the reading and writing section. Each will be divided into two stages or sets of questions. These are also known as modules. Students will answer a set of questions in the first module, and then when they move on to the second module, the set of questions they encounter will be more or less difficult depending on how they performed on the first module. I know that's a lot of information, so we're going to talk and unpack that a little bit more in a little while. So adaptive testing is a big change. Another change coming to the test is that the new digital SAT will be shorter overall than the current SAT. It will go from about 3 hours to 2 hours and 14 minutes. There are a couple of reasons for this, which we'll get to throughout our presentation today. Today's paper-based SAT breaks reading and writing into two separate sections, a reading section and a separate writing and language section. The digital SAT combines the two subjects into a single reading and writing section. Today on the paper test, the reading section has 5 reading passages, 4 standalone passages, and 1 pair of passages. These passages are lengthy and contain 500 to 700 words in total. Each passage or pair of passages is then followed by multiple questions related to the passage. The current paper test also has 4 long passages in the writing and language section, and each passage there is followed by multiple questions. On the digital exam, in the reading and writing section, students will encounter more passages, but they will be much shorter texts, ranging from 25 to 150 words, basically paragraph length, and each short passage will be followed by only 1 question. So bottom line, the new digital SAT combines reading and writing into one section, and students will have multiple short reading passages instead of less lengthy ones. And each passage or pair of passages will have only one question to answer. In the math section, the current test is divided into two separate portions. One allows calculators and the other does not. On the digital SAT, students will see a single math section that allows the use of the calculator on the entire section. A little more detail about the calculators. Students may bring their own calculator that meets the College Board requirements if they choose. If they forget one or choose not to use their own, a graphing calculator will be built directly into the testing application. Students will be required to put their calculators away during the reading and writing section. This is the same rule as today. And some questions still might not require a calculator, but students are allowed to use them if they want to. Another change is to the questions in context, also known as word problems. Today, those problems are longer and can be pretty wordy. On the digital SAT, word problems will be more concise. Also, the current SAT includes common formulas right on the test document. On the digital version, those will be on the screen as a part of the digital tools of the exam. And what about scores? With the digital SAT, scores will be available a lot faster. Students and educators will receive scores in days, not weeks. The benefit here, of course, is that students will be able to get the data they need to inform their college decisions faster than with the paper and pencil test. Before we move on, a few more things you should know about the digital SAT suite of exams. This is obvious, but digital means students will take the SAT on a laptop or tablet using a custom-built digital exam app. Students can use their own device or a school-issued device. There will be an option to borrow devices from the College Board if needed. When registering for the digital SAT, students will have a place to let College Board know they'll need to borrow a device. In case you're curious, students will download the exam app in advance of test day, or school devices will have it already installed. And most of interest to your students, the digital SAT will have several tools built right into the app. We mentioned the calculator and the reference sheet of common formulas, but there will also be a way for students to flag questions so they can come back to them later. A countdown clock, they can show it or hide it at the top of their screen, and this is important for pacing. An annotation tool to mark up text as they read, and an answer choice elimination tool. So now let's take a look inside the exam's two sections and two modules within each section. We mentioned earlier that the reading and writing section will have short reading passages or pairs of passages that are each followed by a single multiple choice question. Questions on this section cover 4 content domains. Each of these domains measures various comprehension, vocabulary, analysis, synthesis, and reasoning skills, as shown here. So craft and structure. This area is measuring various skills and knowledge needed to understand and use words in context, understand the structure and purpose of texts, and make connections between multiple texts. Information and ideas. This is about how to use comprehension, analysis, and reasoning skills to understand and interpret information and ideas in a text. Expression of ideas. Here, students are going to focus on the development, organization, and synthesis of written work. And standard English conventions. This is where students will edit text to conform to core conventions of sentence structure, usage, and punctuation rules. The math section covers 4 types of math, which you can see here. Students will be tested in geometry and trigonometry. So these are those questions about concepts like lines, angles, area, triangles, and volume. And there are also some trigonometry questions. Problem solving and data analysis focuses on many concepts like ratio, percentages, probability, sample statistics. Algebra, it covers concepts like linear equations and linear functions. And advanced math follows or focuses on concepts like equivalent expressions and system of equations, just to name a few. So you'll recall our discussion on multi-stage adaptive testing and the stages or modules. Here's how that's going to look on the digital SAT. First, let's look at a module structure of the reading and writing section. It will have 54 questions and will be 64 minutes in length in total. All students will begin reading and writing with Module 1. It has 27 questions and they're a mix of easy, medium, and hard questions. And students will have 32 minutes to get through that first module. Once the student completes the first module, they'll be moved into the second reading and writing module, which is also 27 questions and 32 minutes long. If the student performed poorly on Module 1, the test will adapt and choose Module 2A. Module 2A is made up of easy and medium questions. If the student performed well on Module 1, then the test adapts and gives the student Module 2B, the more challenging module with medium and hard questions. Once the student submits reading and writing Module 2, they'll get a break, and then they'll begin the math section. As you can see here, the math section has 44 questions, and it's 70 minutes in length. Students start with Module 1, which has 22 questions on it, and students have 35 minutes to complete them. Just like the reading and writing section, the student will need to do well on Math Module 1 to move on to Math Module 2B. If they perform poorly on Math Module 1, the student will move to Math Module 2A, the easier module. One thing worth noting is that the student will not be told which module they receive for that second module. Now, because details about scoring and the modules are still forthcoming from the College Board, the obvious question for us here at Huntington is how the different module options affect students' overall scores. What we do know right now is receiving Module 2A in either section, the easier of the two modules, will limit a student's score on that overall section. We also know that receiving Module 2B in either section, the harder module, will allow a student to maximize their score on that section. Although we know that performance on the first module of each section is what determines which second module they receive, what we don't know right now is exactly how each section of the SAT chooses to give the easier Module 2A or harder Module 2B. In other words, we don't know how many questions or which difficulty level of questions a student must get correct on Module 1 to be able to move to the harder second module. We're certain that this information will be communicated by the College Board soon, and we always will keep our students informed of the most current information as they're preparing for the test. More broadly, we also don't know how the digital SAT will compare to the practice information that's available right now from the College Board. Since this test is new, the College Board has released information about its planned content, but they may make adjustments and changes to the test prior to the first official administration in March of 2024. How will scores on the new exam compare to the current SAT? The College Board has stated that scoring for the digital SAT will be comparable to scores on the current SAT. So on the current SAT, a student can score between 400 and 1600 in total. The digital SAT will be scored in the same range, 400 to 1600. What remains to be seen that we don't know about digital SAT and scoring is whether colleges will use scores differently or the same. So I mentioned colleges a few minutes ago, and there are several things that parents need to know about the state of college admissions in 2023. We won't get into this too deep into this, but the reality is that college admissions is very competitive today. Since the pandemic, there has been an unprecedented rise in college applications. The Common App reported applications were up 7.5% between the 2021-22 and 2022-23 admission cycles. Colleges everywhere are seeing decreased acceptance rates, and many colleges are seeing higher numbers of early applications, making early deadlines more competitive. It's true that the average number of college applications per student has increased over the last decade, and there are a couple of reasons for this. First, as the cost of college has risen, many students want to compare financial options and give themselves the best chance of acceptance by applying widely to several schools. Another reason is that the test optional and test blind policies that arose during COVID led some students to apply to schools that they might not have attempted previously. Without SAT or ACT scores holding them back, it led to many colleges receiving more applications. College admissions is a volatile landscape with a lot of competition. This means students really need to put their best foot forward when applying to college. Parents, we mentioned the term test optional on the previous slide, which you've probably heard about in the last few years. When the pandemic caused many schools to close, testing sites for the SAT and ACT were also impacted. A number of colleges made college entrance exam scores optional to ease the burden on students. Some have continued to stick to test optional, and others have returned to requiring that scores be submitted. However, we want to address this. Taking the SAT is still highly beneficial and important. Here's a few important reasons. First, strong SAT, ACT scores are a chance to prove knowledge and skills. This is important if a student's GPA isn't as strong. Second, taking the SAT or ACT will open up more opportunities for scholarships and grants and balances out a lower GPA. Colleges and universities use SAT and ACT scores for admissions, but they also use them to screen students for merit-based scholarships. SAT and ACT scores are sometimes necessary for full admission into colleges or programs within a university. It's important to understand that test-optional colleges will review test scores if a student submits them. So SAT and ACT scores can strengthen students' application packages, helping them to stand out when applying to a highly competitive school in today's highly competitive admissions environment. So we know test scores are important. Obviously, how your student is impacted by the SAT going digital depends on where they are in their journey through high school right now. So let's look more closely at this. Students starting high school this fall, who will graduate in the year 2027, will take only digital SAT suite exams. They'll start their journey with the PSAT 8-9 in the spring of 2024. The PSAT 8-9 timing varies by school, but it's often offered to 9th grade students in the spring. If you're not familiar with the PSAT 8-9, it's the first in the SAT suite of assessments and tests the same knowledge and skills as the SAT does for college and career readiness, but at 8th and 9th grade levels. It's useful to give your students a baseline of where they are to ensure they're on track for AP course placement and to help them begin thinking about potential careers and majors. As sophomores, this class will take the digital PSAT 10 in the spring of 2025. And then as juniors, these students will take the digital PSAT NMSQT in the fall of 2025. Then they'll take the digital SAT in either the fall of 2025 or spring of 2026, depending on when they choose to do that. By then, we should all be much more familiar and comfortable with this exam. So next steps for students in this class are to prep to take the PSAT 8-9 next spring in 2024. Students who are starting sophomore year this fall and will graduate in the year 2026 will take digital SAT suite exams going forward. If their school chose to administer the PSAT 8-9 last spring, they took the paper-based exam. These students might benefit from taking the current SAT this coming fall. More about that in a minute. As sophomores, these students will be the first high school class to take the new digital PSAT 10 in spring of 2024. As juniors, these students will take the new digital PSAT NMSQT in the fall of 2024. Then they'll take the new digital SAT in either fall of 2024 or spring of 2025, depending on when they choose to do that. Side note, we often advise juniors who have a heavy AP schedule and plan to take the advanced placement exams in spring to take the SAT for the first time in the fall of their junior year. That way they can prep during the late summer before junior year starts and get the exam out of the way. Next steps, as I mentioned a moment ago, we believe that students in the class of 2026 should strongly consider prepping for and taking the current paper-based version of the SAT in fall of 2023. They'll be taking the digital PSAT 10 in the spring of 2024. Taking the current paper-based SAT allows them to establish a foundation to begin working from, so they can begin strengthening academic skills that will help them when they take the digital exam. We believe this is going to be an important part of a solid strategy for underclassmen students. They can begin to hone their test prep skills now, and then when the digital SAT comes around and they're juniors, they'll be poised to do well. Students who are starting junior year and will graduate in the year 2025 will take both current and digital SAT suite exams. Last spring of 2023, these students took the paper-based PSAT 10. This group will be the first high school class in the US to take the digital PSAT NMSQT as juniors. That's this fall in 2023. Then this class has two options. One, they can take the current paper and pencil SAT in the fall of this year, 2023. Or two, they can take the new digital SAT in spring 2024, which is the first time it will be offered. Okay, actually there's a third option. They can do both. So, next steps for this student, they should plan and prep for the digital PSAT and NMSQT in fall 2023. We also feel the class of 2025 should take the SAT for the first time in fall of 2023 as juniors. This is the only class that has the advantage of exposure to both versions of the SAT. They can study for it this fall, which will help them on the PSAT and NMSQT as well. The paper and pencil exam is the one that we're all familiar with today. Testing in fall of junior year does have advantages as mentioned, especially for students taking spring AP exams. And doing so with the format that Huntington is familiar with means prepping now is advantageous as well. Then, if these students don't receive the score that they want in fall 2023, or they just want to try it again, they can still take the test again in spring 2024 in the new digital format. The skills that they learn for the paper SAT will absolutely apply to the digital test as well, and Huntington can help them prep for that digital test. Lastly, the senior class. Students who are graduating in spring 2024 will take the existing paper and pencil SAT only if they're planning to take it one final time, as the digital SAT will not be available until next March, just before they graduate in May or June of 2024. So if you have a student who's headed into senior year, they won't take the new digital SAT. They might be planning to take the current paper test one more time this fall in time for application deadlines, but they might be done too. As mentioned, we believe that all high school students should strongly consider taking the SAT this fall before it goes digital in 2024. Excluding the August exam that's in 2 weeks, there are 3 more opportunities for the paper-based SAT. Why is taking the current SAT a good idea? First, the existing SAT is familiar to colleges. The new one's not, and there is certainly the possibilities that colleges will use scores differently. Second, the existing paper SAT is familiar to Huntington. We have a proven track record of helping students succeed on this exam. We can work with your student this fall. One big question mark for us still is the scoring of the multi-stage adaptive test. Because of this, it's impossible to know how many correct questions will be needed to achieve a goal score. That's not the case with the current SAT. We can help your student get the highest number of questions right possible. Lastly, if students do not receive the score they want in fall of 2023, they can still test again in spring of 2024, and Huntington can help them do so. So now that we've talked about the digital SAT and what to expect, let's talk about the importance of preparation. If your student needs help with the SAT or PSAT or any other standardized exam, Huntington can assist. Let's talk about what we do. Huntington helps students improve their SAT scores and open doors to their top college choices. And here's how. We start by doing a comprehensive evaluation, a full practice test. We then pinpoint the student's strengths and weaknesses so we can design a program that's tailored to that student's abilities and goals. We then develop a personalized exam prep plan based on the results of the practice test. The student will then be set up with a certified tutor to begin prep. Programs are available in a one-to-one format, online, in-center, or via a hybrid approach, which is a combination of online and in-center instruction. We also offer Huntington Online Prep. It's a supplemental resources that students can use in addition in our program. Students who complete Huntington's SAT and ACT prep programs see an average increase of 229 points on the SAT and 5.4 points on the ACT. We're proud of our proven results and offer many advantages like flexible scheduling, certified experienced teachers, and a variety of prep choices, premier 32-hour and 14-hour programs. Ideally, your students should give themselves 10 to 12 weeks to study, but life is busy. We can certainly work with students operating with less time than that. So here's a sample test prep schedule using the upcoming November 4th, 2023 SAT administration as an example. So let's say your student starts studying Saturday, August 26th. That's exactly 11 weeks to the exam. For the first 4 weeks, your student should get familiar with the exam by taking an initial evaluation test offered at Huntington, identify strong and weak areas and develop a targeted plan, work with a tutor to develop the best test prep schedule based on the student's school schedule, time until college enrollment, and any other relevant factors. Break down the schedule into subjects and specific areas within each. For example, math would be broken down into the specific areas where your student needs to focus their attention. Start practicing different problem types, multiple choice, student-produced response questions, improving sentence questions. Study a few days a week based on a customized prep schedule. Beginning about 6 weeks out from the exam, or in this case, September 23rd, your students should delve more deeply into the different exam sections, targeting weaker areas. Practice time management by understanding the structure of the exam, learning to quickly recognize incorrect answers, and by improving speed. Gain an understanding of how the tests are scored. Take at least 2 full-length time practice tests, one at the beginning of the month, one towards the end of the month. Study a few days a week based on a customized prep schedule. And register for the exam. We are suggesting registering as early as possible because this would be the second to last paper SAT. We're expecting it to fill up. And then in our timeline, at 2 weeks out from test day, October 21st in this case, your students should focus on weaker sections by taking timed simulation exams on those specific sections. Improve on question types where the lowest practice scores are received, and adjust study schedule accordingly. For example, if a student struggles most with words and context questions, those vocabulary questions, but does well on the grammar and punctuation questions, minimize study spent on the latter and increase time spent on the former. Continue to focus on improving speed on the exam, study each day, and take 2 more full-length timed exams, more if possible. So I did want to share with you what a few parents have had to say about test prep at Huntington. So Kelly W. shared, having our son prepare for the SAT has helped him in more ways than just improving his score. He's doing better on his tests at school, and he is more sure of himself. He's able to apply with confidence to better schools with his improved SAT score. My daughter raised her SAT score by 200 points in 8 weeks. True story. The staff doesn't just teach. They track, they analyze, they strategize, they coach. They were my daughter's on-the-ground team for success on this test. And C. Cruz shared, Huntington is amazing. My daughter's SAT score increased by over 300 points in less than a year on their program. The tutors and especially the director are so passionate about getting your child to learn better and think better. We're so happy that we were able to help these students. Let's quickly go over what else we can do for your students or any of your students' younger siblings. Getting to college requires consistent effort for many years. We can help your child become the best student possible and achieve their goals from an early age. Our foundational programs are Learning Center and exam prep programs that we just went over. Learning Center program, this academic skilled-paced program is customized to meet students' academic needs. Kindergarten through 12th grade tutoring in phonics, reading, writing, spelling, math, sciences, study skills, and other subjects. Our exam prep program, as mentioned, this program prepares students for state and standardized exams, including SAT, ACT, PSAT, state tests, advanced placement, and high school entrance exams. Here's an overview of all Huntington programs. Whatever academic support your student needs, whatever grade they're in, Huntington can help. For elementary students, we build and reinforce the skills needed to succeed in reading, writing, phonics, math, and study skills. For middle school students, we keep students on track academically and help them improve grades and prepare for high school, where there are greater teacher demands, increased workload, and more challenging homework. For high school students, we help them keep up with homework, tests, essays, quizzes, and other schoolwork, while also boosting their grades and test scores to ensure they get into the college of their choice. As mentioned, we have test prep programs for the different types of tests students might take, like the SAT and ACT, or like school entrance exams, such as the HSPT, the SSAT, and the ISEE. And that is our presentation today. So thank you so much for joining. We are going to answer some questions that you have. But make sure, please do check the other webinars that were mentioned earlier at the URL that you see on the screen.
Thank you, Carol. Lots of great stuff, very comprehensive programs to help students. So thank you for sharing all that. So let's dive into the Q&A. And first question is, and I think you've touched on this a little bit before, is should we prioritize taking the paper exam? And if we do, will colleges look at my child's scores differently? So I guess they're concerned that maybe if they're making the transition to digital, are they going to look at the child's scores differently than they may digital students? What do you think? Should they prioritize the paper exam? I think you've touched on this, but it might be helpful to just kind of reemphasize why.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's an absolutely fantastic question. So the first part of the question, should we prioritize taking the paper exam? If your student is in a position to do so, we highly recommend taking the paper version of the exam for a lot of reasons. The biggest reason is that the digital SAT is a brand new test. Because it's brand new, there are going to be unknowns. I shared during the call that this test is multi-stage adaptive, and performance on that first module in a section will impact which second module the student receives. I shared that a student needs to get to that harder second module of the test to be able to maximize their score in that section. Right now, scoring information from the College Board is limited, so students can't really be sure how many questions on that first module they need to answer correctly to get to that harder second module. That makes goal setting on such a new test much more challenging. And going into a test like this with goals and a very firm plan is a critical component to performing well on the test. I also shared that although the College Board has released information about what this test will contain, between now and when the test is first administered in March of next year, College Board may change some of their original plans. It's understandable that College Board may want to adjust or tweak their test if they feel it's better for the student, but if they do that, a student runs the risk of being surprised by those changes on test day. We've worked with so many students for the past 45 years. One thing is for sure, when a student's in the middle of an extremely important test, just one unexpected surprise can throw off their concentration for the entire test. But that is most certainly a risk that a student faces if they take a brand new test like the digital SAT. The paper SAT and also the ACT test, these are both well-known tests. They've been around for a number of years, so we all have a very solid understanding of what appears on these tests. We also have a strong understanding of scoring for these tests, making them much easier right now to set goals for. So taking an established test like the paper SAT or the ACT, it's much less risky. I can't stress this enough. Your student has a very small window of opportunity when applying to college, so it's in their best interest to eliminate any risks when possible. And taking the paper SAT or the ACT, these are the less risky options for your student right now. The second part of the question, that will colleges look at my child's scores differently if the student takes the paper SAT versus the digital SAT? What I just said holds true for that part of this part of the question too. This test is new, and there are a lot of unknowns to everyone. Colleges are going to need some time to truly understand how digital SAT scores relate to their specific academic skill requirements for their school. We really can't be sure how exactly colleges will view digital SAT scores yet, because the colleges aren't sure yet. So this goes right back to what I said a minute ago, which is the new test comes with risks. So we encourage any student, if they can do so, to take the paper SAT this fall before the test changes to digital in 2024.
Great. And you actually touched on you mentioned the ACT, which we hadn't talked about, but one person just jumped in with a question saying, why should someone take the risk with the new digital SAT and as opposed to just taking the ACT? So do you think the ACT is another good option, because that's not going digital, at least not, I don't know if they've made any plans for that to go digital yet, but that will still be a paper-based exam, correct?
Yes, the ACT, I have been mentioning it because it is a very good option. The ACT, they have not shared any plans to change the format of their test digitally. Some test sites will offer the ACT on a computer, but it is the exact same test as a paper-based test. So they are not changing the format of their test. There's nothing changing with how it's scored or any of that. So it is a tried and true test that's not changing anytime soon, which is why I keep mentioning it. It is absolutely a viable option for students.
The next question is it 3 hours straight for the digital test, or is there a small break? Now, I think the digital test is just about 2 hours. Is that right? So maybe just, do you know if there's a break during the digital test? Because this parent's a little concerned about the amount of screen time and just sitting there for that long doing a computer-based test.
Yeah, it's a good concern. We all sit in front of computers a little too much these days. So there is one break on the digital SAT. So first, the total test time on the digital SAT is 2 hours and 14 minutes. So there will be a break in between the reading and writing section and the math section. So they get through that first section of reading and writing, and then they'll get a 5-minute break, and then they will move on to the math section. So they will definitely get a break in there.
Great. This person wrote, we've been preparing for the paper tests. Is the preparation work going to be much different for the digital SAT? And I'm guessing that's probably still a little TBD at this point, but.
Well, first, let me say, it makes me very happy whenever a question starts with, we've been preparing, since I shared the importance of prepping for these tests. If you've been preparing for the paper test, the first thing I'm going to say is, get yourself registered for one or more of the remaining test dates this year. You've been preparing for the paper, use what you've learned on the paper test. Will what you've done with the paper test be different than what you need to do for the new digital SAT? Yes and no. So when you prepare for the digital test, you're going to want to be familiar with the digital format, the shorter passages, the layout of the test, the on-screen tools, like the math calculator or flagging a question. Those are differences that you'll need to learn about that you wouldn't be focusing right now for the paper test. But what you should be focusing on right now as you're prepping for the paper test is the academic skills in reading, writing, and math. So if you struggle with, we'll say, punctuation, focusing on that skill for the paper test will absolutely help you prepare for the digital test. Because the one thing that's not changing on the SAT is that it's going to continue to test the student's academic skills to gauge how ready the student is for what they're going to face in college. So building and reinforcing those skills is what we do at Huntington. Strengthen the skills, and a student is prepared not only for the test, but for the homework and tests that they encounter right now in school, and for the more challenging coursework that they're going to face when they get into the college of their dreams. So starting to prep right now for the paper test has a multitude of benefits. And if your child chooses to then move on and take the digital SAT next March, they'll already have worked on and strengthened the academic skills that they need, and then can just apply to the different format of the test.
Great. We did have one question about how are the scores going to be evaluated for the digital SAT, and I can't recall if that's still something that we're trying to determine. But do you have any insights on that, or is that still to be determined?
I'm not quite sure I understand
the question.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I interpret it, let me go back and see if I can just read it. How will score evaluate in digital SAT? So I'm assuming, you know, what is the scoring number going to be different? How would you evaluate whether or not you did well or didn't do well based upon that score? Or is the scoring, the end scoring result about the same? It's just going to be weighted differently based upon the adaptive questions. That's kind of the way I interpret that question.
Yeah, so it is a very challenging question.
Yeah.
On the higher level, I can share with you what the College Board has shared about scoring, and that is that the score range will stay the same. So right now on the current test, a student can score between a 400 and a 1600. That's the same score range that they're using for the digital SAT, between a 400 and a 1600. What College Board has shared is that the scores are comparable, and this is really for the colleges. Colleges, when a college is looking at test scores, they normally have a score range that they're looking for. And so as an example, they may be looking for a student to have between a 600 and a 700 in math as their score. And that's because they recognize that students who get between a 600 and a 700 in math on the SAT are more likely to be successful with the course rigor that they have in their particular college. So what College Board is saying is that the colleges should still be able to use that same score range, because a 600 on the digital SAT will be comparable to a 600 on the current SAT. So that's as much information as we have right now. But the main thing, as I said, is that College Board is saying that these scores on the new SAT are comparable to the current SAT.
So we got this question that came in, and it says, will Huntington have a digital SAT program in the future?
Well, that's a fantastic question. So Huntington will begin offering a digital SAT program this October. Included in that program will be a full-length digital SAT test as an initial assessment, and then numerous digital SAT practice tests, along with all of the other benefits that I shared about our test prep programs. But I do want to reiterate something that I've said throughout today's call, which is that there's a common denominator between the current paper SAT and the digital SAT, and that's academic skills. So we have students right now who are prepping for the paper SAT or even the ACT, and the skills that they're learning for those tests will be invaluable if they take the digital PSAT or eventually the digital SAT as of next March. So please, no matter which test your student is planning to take, don't wait. Time is of the essence, and it is never too early to prep. So your child can absolutely get started with their prep now to ensure they have as much time as possible to build the academic skills that are needed for any of these tests.
Great. And then another question, I think you answered this earlier, but someone was asking about the graphing calculator and the calculator functionality. That's going to be embedded into the test taking app, or is it just a basic calculator, I guess would be a question, or is it a graphic calculator?
It is a specific calculator. It's the Desmos calculator. A lot of students are actually already familiar with this calculator. Maybe as adults we're not, but the kids are. So it will be embedded right into the app so that the students will have access to it. And it's something that as a student is preparing for the test, we always share with our students, you should be using the calculator that you're going to use on test day. So if they're going to use that embedded calculator that's on the screen, every time that they're prepping for their math, they should be using that same calculator, it's an online calculator that you can absolutely access online. If they are going to use a standard calculator, College Board does have requirements, so there are specifications as to which calculators can be used on the test. So the student wants to do their research on the College Board's website and then make sure that they have fresh batteries on test day.
Yeah, perfect. Great. So now before we wrap things up, a couple of key takeaways. We've covered a lot of material, but if you had to kind of summarize maybe into, 2 or 3 things that you want parents to take away from today's presentation, what would be those kind of key things?
So definitely a key thing is to understand that the digital SAT, it is a new test, so it will come with risks. It doesn't mean it's a bad test, but you just have to weigh out your options and you have to decide, is this the basket I want to put all my eggs in? If your student is able to prep sooner and can get that paper-based SAT in, which is a tried and true test, and can get this test done by the December test is the last test this year of the paper test, absolutely do so. Or what was shared before, the ACT is absolutely a viable option. That test is tried and true. It's a fantastic test. It is a great option in colleges, accept it just like they do the SAT. The other big takeaway that I would say is prep. This is not the type of test that a student can cram for at the last minute. And I will also share that it's not the type of test that every student can just prep for on their own. This is the type of test that having someone who is skilled and knowledgeable about the test benefits the student in so many ways. So having expert assistance with preparation, instead of thinking that a student is just going to prep for this on their own quickly before the test, it's a good solid game plan to prepare with someone and have a plan going into that preparation.
Excellent. And another thing to kind of build off what you're saying, think about, we like to think about the SAT and the ACT as really helping you build that college portfolio, that college resume, right? So if you're concerned about maybe grades in a particular year or different things, and you're just trying to boost your overall resume, to your point, Carol, about the new test and sort of, there's risk, but there's also just sort of a feeling out going on, I'm sure, about what those results really mean. If you do the paper-based SAT, every admissions board in the country knows what those results mean. And if you do well on that test, I think that would probably help boost your resume for college admissions, maybe a little bit more than what the digital SAT may, because there's still some of that uncertainty. So just something to think about. That's just a thought that I had before we wrap things up. I'm not sure if you would agree or not, but.
Oh, I absolutely agree. College admissions officers have so many applications going across their desk, and they're going to be looking for certain things. And those SAT scores from the current test hold so much weight with them that they'll help them make their decisions quicker. Digital SAT, again, still there are some unknowns with it.
Yeah, great. Well, Carol, thank you so much. We're right about the top of the hour, and I know a lot of people had some great questions, and hopefully we got through every single one. If we didn't get to your specific question or you have some follow-ups, let us know, but we'll certainly try to follow up with everybody whose questions didn't get answered. But I think we got through pretty much all of them, which is great. As Carol mentioned, huntingtonhelps.com/webinars, that's where all of our on-demand events are stored, as well as our next upcoming events. So a lot of great webinars and resources. And actually, if you go to Huntington Helps, you click on that resources tab, we've got a lot of great articles, blog posts. We get guest bloggers that come in that talk about everything from ADHD to you name it, right? Study skills. And so there is a lot of really great information. And then, of course, if you ever have questions, just go to the website. The phone number is right there. You can call in. You can speak to an education expert who's there to help you either get in touch with the center in your neighborhood that's closest to you, or to answer any other kinds of questions you have. So that concludes today's presentation. On behalf of Huntington Learning Center, I want to say thank you so much for making time out of your day. We know there's so much going on, particularly in the dog days of August. So we really appreciate you making the time to join us. That concludes today's event. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Stay well, everybody.